Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. And on behalf of IOSH, I'd like to welcome you to the day 2 of the second virtual rail conference. This afternoon, we have Louise Ward speaking to us. Louise Ward is a very experienced health and safety practitioner, over 25 years experience. Louise's career has spanned a wide range of industries, from high-risk environments with companies like British Nuclear Fuels, BP, the MOD, Network Rail, Thames Water, and Siemens, where I had the pleasure of working with Louise. Louise is now Safety and Sustainability Director for G&W Freightliner, overseeing operations in the UK and Europe, as well as being a dedicated practicing health and safety specialist. Louise has been involved in the development of a number of legislation, guidance material and regulatory policy. She's a particular interest in professional development, supports lots of initiatives in that area. Visiting lecturer at Middlesex University and a member of the group developing degree level apprenticeships. Louise has written regularly for the trade press, co-authored a book about well-being, and contributed to the recent 1% Safer initiative, which was a fantastic read. In 2021, Louise was presented with a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Safety and Health Excellence Awards for a recognition of contribution to the profession. Louise today will discuss how COVID's impacted health and safety and the perception of health and safety, and how we're moving beyond the pandemic within the rail industry. So I'd like to welcome Louise now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Keith. Hi, everybody. Quick sound check. Can you hear me all right? Everything okay?
Absolutely fine, yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. Thanks very much for inviting me to speak to you this afternoon. I'm not going to take a formal approach. I thought we'd leave it fairly informal. I'll talk for a bit and then there's time for questions and answers. And really it's a collection of observations about the unprecedented times we've been living through recently, and the impact of that on us as professionals. So let's start back before COVID. I think that pre-COVID, if we can remember back that far, because it feels like the whole space-time continuum has changed, doesn't it, over the last few months. If you think back before COVID, I think safety in the UK had plateaued in a lot of ways. It had a lot of focus over a number of years, and a lot of organisations, particularly those in high hazard sectors like ours, they got good. We'd moved from compliance through culture, through behaviour, into engagement, focus on well-being, and I think particularly large, high hazard organisations were a little bit complacent. We were doing well, we were moving forwards, we were applying the continual improvement cycle, but we were sitting pretty. And I think for most of us, global pandemic was one of those lines on the risk register that you updated once a quarter by reading through it and thinking, yeah, we'll leave that one as it is. It just didn't feel like anything that might ever happen. It was the stuff of Hollywood movies. Big organisations, I'm sure all of you working in responsible organisations, you had your crisis management plans in place, you were doing some exercises, but it was largely untested and it wasn't anything that was feeling like a burning platform. But then everything changed. COVID catapulted both health and safety right into the spotlight in a way that I don't think we had ever seen before. Suddenly colleagues who'd been clamoring for access to the boardroom to get their voice heard and to be part of discussions about moving the business forward, all of a sudden found they were being ushered in and had a permanent seat in a way that they'd not experienced before. Suddenly we had to become experts and develop skills in epidemiology, infection control and biological safety. There's this world of constantly changing government documentation that we had to stay on top of. And I'm sure many of you, like me, were signed up to the government alerts and scanning literally tens, hundreds of documents a day, thinking about what that meant for your organisation. And if ever there was something that was going to engender a bit of imposter syndrome, it was probably this, because I'm sure that all of us had moments when we sat there and thought, how on earth am I qualified to do this? But we did. I actually think the biggest challenge that I experienced was staying on top of this constantly evolving supply chain of miracle solutions that were being really heavily marketed online. Umpteen times every day, I would have emails from senior colleagues in the business saying, I've been offered this on LinkedIn and I want to buy it for my business. And it was really hard because what we got as a high performing sector was a load of really empowered senior execs who totally get safety. They totally understand what it's all about, really positively motivated, really want to do the very best for their guys. And they're being offered miracle solutions. And it was my role to be assessing those and working out which ones we should spend our money on and which ones we shouldn't. And the which ones we shouldn't messages were probably the hardest, actually. There was no challenge. I experienced no challenge spending money on things to keep the guys safe. The challenge was when I said, actually, do you know what? I think this miracle product that you're being offered is too good to be true. It's unvalidated, unverified, and I don't think we should invest our hopes or our money in it. I think that was a real challenge. But it really was unprecedented and unbelievably challenging in so many ways. I think it tested all of our crisis management and resilience to the very limit. I have a really clear recollection of the day that I pressed the big red go button on the crisis management plan at Siemens Mobility here in the UK. It was early in March. We'd been watching the situation developing across the world through January and February like everybody else had. But early in March 2020, we had our first diagnosed case in the UK. I was down at Poole, at our site in Poole. I was actually on a workshop, a staff development workshop for our safety team down there with the new head of safety that we'd just appointed who hadn't even started in the business yet. And I got the call. And I stepped out of that workshop and left it in the hands of poor Spencer, who hadn't even started his job, bless him, and got focused. And from then on, the agenda was pretty much COVID-centric for the next few months. 2 weeks after that, Siemens sent probably about 2/3 of their workforce, a couple of 100,000 people, to work from home. Anyone who could, as in all the other organisations around the world, anyone who could easily work from home went to work from home. And we wrapped a blanket around the operational staff who couldn't. We kept out anybody who didn't need to be there. There was lots of talk of bubbles. Don't get me started on bubbles. There was lots of talk of bubbles and making sure that only the people that needed to be in the operational environments were there. And the first couple of weeks of home working were a real disaster. Nothing worked. The IT didn't stand up. Nothing worked. But do you know what? Within less than 2 weeks, Siemens had rolled out Office 365 and Teams and SharePoint and OneDrive. And we'd moved into a pretty stable place to be in terms of our technology. It was still a challenge. Trying to learn to cope with working remotely was still a challenge. We had a fantastic program called In This Together, which regularly surveyed all our staff to find out what they were struggling with and what they were worried about. And we had this e-learning program of seminars and webinars and things that people could dial into to get help with everything from anxiety and mental well-being. We did some fantastic parenting sessions to help people who were trying to balance work and homeschooling, how to organise virtual meetings and hybrid meetings, how to cope with a diary that was suddenly back to back with virtual meetings all day and no time to do work. We rolled all of this out with huge enthusiasm to great positive reception from the business. And then we had a message from our front line and they said, what about us? You're doing all this fantastic stuff for all you people who are no longer in offices and are tucked up safe at home. But we're out there with this killer virus, and what are you doing for us? And that was a really sobering moment for me, because we had focused on the thing that felt like it had changed rather than the thing that had pretty much stayed the same. But it hadn't stayed the same. It was completely different too. And we very quickly did a bit of a regroup and got focused on supporting those operational guys with the things that were an issue for them. They too were worried. They were desperately worried about being out and working and potentially taking COVID home to their family. We were struggling like everybody else to get masks and hand sanitizer. We have field service population out there who suddenly had no access to welfare facilities because they traditionally relied on fast food restaurants and motorway service stations for toilets and food. And all of a sudden those places were closed. So we really had to do some agile thinking, and it dominated everything. As time went on, we got better, as I'm sure all of you did. But the question is, when do we stop and learn? Have you guys done the lessons learned yet? Does it feel too soon? We did some. As we got through sort of the first phase and first national lockdown ease, we did a bit of lessons learned then. We did the same after second national lockdown. But I think the big question for me is, if you'd known then what you know now, would you have done things in the same way? Because what we were dealing with was completely unprecedented. We had no idea what we were going into. And initially, it sort of makes me think actually of learning about the First World War when I was at school. You know, the mantra, "It will all be over by Christmas." That was a similar thing, wasn't there? You know, we said up 3 to 6 months and we'll be out the other end of this. And then time marched on and cases went up again. And we said, right, 9 to 12 months and we'll be out the other side. Now here we are, we're more than 18 months on, and there's no end in sight. Some experts say it'll be 3 years, but nobody really knows. But maybe actually that incremental 3 months, 9 months, 12 months thing, maybe that's what's made it bearable. Because actually, if we looked into this at the beginning and said, our lives are going to be turned on their heads for 18 months, and even then we won't know what's next, maybe that's just too much for us as human beings to get our heads around. Maybe actually having those smaller time periods is the thing that's allowed us to take that incremental approach and go on adapting and coping, because we have adapted. And do you know what? I think that's one of the things that our profession does really, really well. I think the pandemic has brought out the very best in us as a profession. It's thrown a spotlight on the non-technical skills that are so key to what we do in our everyday work. It's not just about that technical knowledge. It's about those non-technical skills and that critical thinking that we can apply in a whole range of situations. I'm sure that you guys are in the same boat as me. You know, we didn't know the answers to the questions that our employers were throwing our way. We didn't know, but we had the strength of character and the resilience and the core skills that we needed to go out there and figure it out. And what did we do? We applied basic risk management principles, the thing that is right at the heart of the drumbeat of our everyday work. We stood back, we identified the hazards, we thought about the severity and the routes of exposure, and we sourced control measures that would allow us to balance the risk with the need to keep our businesses running. And that was the thing for us in the rail industry. Shutting the doors and sending everybody home, that wasn't going to be an option because we had to keep running. We were moving medical support personnel and equipment and supplies and facilitating the supply chain for food and basic provisions. We were a core part of keeping the country running at some level through the pandemic and making sure that people had the things they needed to get by. So it was critically important that we kept going, and that really required some out-of-the-box thinking and incremental learning. So we totally were applying that continual improvement cycle as the situation developed, so that we could help our organisations to adapt in order to survive and continue to deliver what the country needed from us. But then the question is, what's next? The pandemic's polarised our profession, I think. It's really thrown that spotlight on the difference between strategists and operational controllers. I think this is a subject that we've struggled with for a long time. And actually, there's a need for both. It's not that we need one thing or the other, but I think traditionally we've tended to focus on operational control. And actually, if we're going to be taking our safety, our health and safety performance to the next level, I think we need that more focus on strategy. There's no doubt in my mind that things will never go back to how they were pre-COVID. The world of work has changed forever. That change has been driven by technology, regardless of whether you were working from home or whether you were out there in an operational environment. Change has been driven by technology. We are all using technology in a very different way. And now we know that a huge number of roles can be delivered from anywhere. So the new normal is going to be, the workforce in the new normal is going to be dispersed. It's going to be mobile and flexible. It's going to be fueled by technology. We're seeing a rise of entrepreneurship. We're seeing micro businesses appearing in global supply chains. And we're seeing a very mobile workforce in the shape of the gig economy. So it's all going to be very different. And I think that puts some key challenges in for us as a profession. Our traditional risk control strategies, they're not going to work. The traditional approaches we might have used when we'd got our high hazard industry surrounded by a great big fence with gates at the front where we could control everything that was going on, the supervision, the monitoring, go look see, face-to-face training, inspection, checklist, that doesn't work anymore when the operation is spilling outside of that perimeter. You can't manage what you can't see and you can't control. So we're going to need new techniques. We're going to need to start thinking about things in a very different way, because it's not just about office staff who've got up from their desks in the workplace and are now working from the dining room table or the home office that they put into their spare bedroom. It's about people being able to work from anywhere, from flexible work hubs, on the train, in the library, wherever they might choose to go. People can now work from anywhere, and that's okay. Previously, I'd always done a little bit of working from home, and previously you'd always feel a little bit guilty about it. And you might not put your camera on if you were on a call, or if you did, you'd blur the background. And if the dog barked or the kids ran across in the background, that was very much frowned upon. But I think that barrier between life and work has broken down completely. It's okay now. We understand that people adapt their work in order to blend it in with their life. And that's tremendously empowering. That's opening up the world of work to a whole population of people who couldn't access it before. And that's brilliant. But from a safety point of view, it's very, very different. So people are working from anywhere. We've got tiny little micro businesses that are now part of these global supply chains. How do you deal with that? How are we going to deal with managing suppliers that aren't used to being part of a corporate supply chain? They're not going to have all the systems and processes and the ISO registrations and things, but they're starting to deliver in a very agile way that supports this new operating model that is the new normal. There's going to be far fewer people in fixed workplaces, and it's going to be a far smaller fixed workforce, I think. We're going to see an increase in this flexible gig labour workforce, people who move around, who will be here for 2 weeks and there for 2 weeks, and then off on a project somewhere else. Yeah. How do we manage those people? How do we manage their welfare and their well-being and their safety and their competence? It's a very different way of thinking. And as I say, we've got a whole population of people with needs that meant they couldn't previously access the world of work, now able to engage. But they all have specific needs too, that we as a profession are going to have to be able to cater for. So as I say, new techniques. I think we're going to need to do things differently. The focus, I think, will have to be on informing people about what they need to do, upskilling them, raising their level of competence and awareness around safety, empowering them to make the right decisions for their own health and their own safety, and trusting them to do the right thing. No longer are we going to say, you will, on the first working day of every year, redo your DSE assessment, and if it says this, we'll do this. People aren't going to sit in the same place twice. They won't even be in the same location, let alone at the same desk. we're going to have to adapt to this by upskilling them, letting them become their own safety officers, let them take responsibility, empower them, trust them, and support them as they get involved in managing their own risk. That's a huge amount to get our heads around in terms of evolution for us and the way that we work. But there's probably some bigger issues too. Does the law need to change? Or do we think actually that the provisions in the framework legislation are flexible enough to cater for this new situation? And even if they are, there's no doubt that standards and guidance is going to have to change, because everything's been written for people going to work in a fixed location that is under the control of the employer. This much more, flexible model doesn't have edges in quite the same way. So I think there's a huge amount that needs to change. I do think we need to rethink entry criteria for our profession. Traditional compliance-based qualifications, I think, have limited application now. I think blended learning that focuses on non-technical skills and supervised experience are going to be much more suitable for the new requirements, the new demands that our profession is placing on us. Health and safety is an absolutely amazing career. If you start right with that right basket of skills, and then you're prepared to move around into different businesses and different environments in order to grow as a professional and build your skill set, then health and safety can take you anywhere, into any industry, pretty much, any part of the world. It's a great opportunity for young people, for career changes. It's a great way to build a really interesting career. I don't need to tell you guys that, but I do think the railway's got some particular challenges. It is a safety critical environment. So, there's a higher level of control required at a starting point. And that's going to present real challenges in terms of this new flexible approach to work. But it's also difficult in terms of upskilling safety professionals, because they've got to have that supervision as they're growing. You can't just go and try stuff out in an environment like ours. It just can't be done. We do have an aging population across the whole workforce in safety, as well as in our general workforce. And that's a key worry for us, because we've got a population of people who are going to be moving towards retirement fairly soon. And I don't think we've necessarily got a new population coming through, building that competence they're going to need to step into those shoes as people move on. We've got some very limited demographics. Let's face it, guys, there is a particular demographic around the rail industry. I'm trying to buck the trend, but I'm getting older. But I think there's a lack of understanding of what a career in the railway, and particularly in health and safety in the railway, has got to offer. We've got a young chap with us in my team at the moment on a Kickstarter program, one of the government's Kickstarter programs. He's had a long time out of employment, and he's with us for a few weeks getting some experience and so get him started into the labour market again. And he sat in one of my team meetings the other day, and we were talking about this. We were talking about attracting talent, because there's the big resignation going on at the moment. Everyone's struggling to recruit and to retain good people. And I said to him, what made you think about a career in the railway? And he said, well, I didn't know anything about it until the job centre suggested it to me. Never thought about it. And we started to talk about the different career options. He's not particularly wedded to safety. In fact, his eyes lit up when we started talking about the driver salaries and things like that. He got really excited about that, but he knew nothing about the railway. And that's daft. Rail is absolutely key to the future of this country. Sustainability, decarbonisation, the levelling up agenda. Rail is right front and centre of all of that. Our sector is going to grow, and we've really got to reach out and help people understand what exciting and challenging opportunities are available here, because we want to encourage people in to be part of this, and we need to be bringing in these people now so that they can get that balance of skill that they're going to need to replace those people who are moving on in the later stages of their career and looking to move out to retire. So how can we future-proof the health and safety profession in rail? I think apprenticeships are a big part of the answer. I think apprenticeships are fabulous. And actually, there was a young chap at Siemens who brought this home to me when I was first working there. He was studying engineering. And he said, yeah, I came through school and I did my A-levels and I came into the apprenticeship and my mates went off to university. And in 3 years' time, they'll graduate and they'll go out there and they'll be on a graduate scheme and trying to get a job. And they'll be massively in debt and just trying to get by and probably doing 2 jobs in order to pay off the debts and things. He said, I came onto the apprenticeship. In 4 years' time, I'll have exactly the same qualification as them. I'm already earning. I'm getting experience as I'm going, and I own my own flat, and I don't owe anybody anything. And I thought that really brings it home. I think apprenticeships have got so much to offer because they are offering structured learning and supported experience and a chance for people to earn as they learn. It's expensive to study in the UK. So I think apprenticeships have got huge potential in health and safety and more generally in rail. And I'm really chuffed that I've been able to support that agenda in previous roles. We've got a number of fantastic degree apprentices working at Siemens where I was until recently. So I think that's a really big thing. But I also think there's a role for IOSH here. I think we need a bit of an evolution, or maybe it's even a revolution around positioning our profession to succeed in the new normal, around making people realise what we've got to offer and what an exciting career health and safety can be, and getting us the skill sets that we need and that supported experience so that we can fulfil that requirement. But I think there's a role for the regulators too, because what I'm talking about is this huge step change. And who knows, maybe it won't come, maybe we'll slip back, but I don't think we will. I think regulators now need to be looking at how their processes evolve as well, because you're not going to be able to regulate in the same way now that work is much less defined and much less contained. So I think the regulatory process has got to evolve, guidance has got to change and move on. And I think there's got to be a step change in thinking around influencing and accountability. So it is a huge challenge, but I think I'm going to paraphrase a much overused quote now and say, with great challenge comes great opportunity. And I think what we do have is an opportunity to honour the memory of all those people who lost their lives during the pandemic by making sure that we learn and we move forward and we make the future better. Because otherwise those lives have just been lost for nothing. And that would be an absolute tragedy. I mean, it is a tragedy that people have died at all, but if we can bring some good, then hopefully that brings some kind of peace of mind for those people who've lost a loved one. So there's one big question, I think, that I'm just going to come on to at the end. There's no doubt there's going to be more pandemics. We sort of got a feel for this now, and we'll apply that learning and we'll do better in the future. But what's the next big unforeseen challenge? Because a pandemic was theoretically possible and we pretty much dismissed it. It was on the risk register. We didn't talk about it much. Now we talk about it all the time. But what's that next big challenge? How can we get ahead of it and steal a march on it so it doesn't take our legs from under us in quite the same way as this has? You know, what's the data telling us? What are the precursors saying? What's the world situation doing? And where are our sources of intelligence? I think there's a role for IOSH here as a beacon of horizon scanning, an intelligence hub, if you like, for future resilience. There's no right answer to any of this. These are big questions that I'm sure we're all dealing with in some way. And I'd encourage all of you to be having those conversations within your own networks and your own organizations and thinking about what comes next and how we get ourselves better positioned for the next big challenge. But to sum up, I'd like to filter down to a much more focused level. We've been talking quite macro, but let's focus in a bit, because it's been an incredibly difficult 18 months. We have all, as health and safety professionals, worked unbelievably hard, and there've been very few opportunities to rest and recuperate. So as we're going into the holiday season and Christmas is on the horizon, I'd like you to think and ask yourself, how are you really? Proper question, not a passing comment. How are you really? And I would encourage all of you to try and find an opportunity to get some rest and recovery over the Christmas holiday period, and to really appreciate the things that we have got, the things that we do well, and think about how we prepare to meet those challenges for the future. There's no doubt that safety profession is key to the future of rail. And I think we need to look after ourselves if we're going to be there to look after other people in the future. So there we go. That's my thoughts for the day. I'm happy to take questions or discussion points and give you a chance to get involved if that's useful.
Yeah, thank you, Louise. Keith's going to take over the questions. I think that's some very good points you made there about how the world has changed. And if I can maybe jump in with a question, Keith, before you do it.
Carry on.
In terms of what we did overnight, not overnight, as you say, we became epidemiologists and experts in all sorts of fields we weren't entirely comfortable with, mostly overnight. That value, do you think that value was appreciated, or the work was appreciated by senior teams? You know, maybe it's a bit of a generalization in terms of senior management within different organizations and even up to government level, because I think there's now a bit of a message of, well, we're just going to go back to normal, back to the office. And that's not what's going to happen. You did make that very clear, Louise. The world of work has changed dramatically. So I don't know, have we accepted that, one, that work was of value, and two, we're going to change from now on, or are we just going to go back to where we were?
I think that's a big question, and probably there's lots and lots of different answers. I think that the way that we as a profession supported GB or our own organisations through the pandemic, I think that was absolutely acknowledged and supported. Did people appreciate quite how much effort went into achieving those outcomes? Possibly not. Possibly not. I'm not sure that every senior exec or member of the government understood quite how many of us were burning the midnight oil, ploughing through those documents and thinking outside the box. But I think it did change their focus on the role that we play in a business. I think we'll find it easier to get that traction at board level. I think we'll be invited into discussions at an earlier stage, because I think we've gone from being viewed perhaps as a necessary evil, or the barrier that you have to get over in order to get on with the day job, to being seen as an enabler, because that's absolutely what we did. In very few situations did we put our hands up and say, right, now stop. All the time we were looking for ways to help the organisations continue, particularly in the rail sector. So yeah, I think it has changed people's perception, and I don't think we'll go back. I don't think we've reached the end point. I think we're on a journey, but at least we've started.
Thank you. Sorry, Keith, to take over very early.
No, that's fine.
You, mate. Thank you.
So first question comes from William Peake. He says for him, the wake-up moment was an early phone conference call, which centred on the client's need to maintain a supply chain. Do you feel that Network Rail, well, he feels that Network Rail were excellent in supporting and engaging with the supply chain. Do you agree? And how do you feel that we can maximise the legacy from that?
I think Network Rail were pretty good, actually. I think there's some good networks across the rail sector. And I think Network Rail were very supportive in terms of how they were managing financials and things like that, as well as sharing information. And actually, right at the beginning, just knowing that we were going to get paid was really important to contractors in the supply chain. And they were really good at that, really good. And I think the information flow worked well. I don't think Network Rail had the answers any more than any of the rest of us did, but I think there was a really good sharing of information and alignment of approach. I don't think there were that many situations where we found that the tier one suppliers had taken a really different view on something to Network Rail. I think we were integrated. I think a lot of that came through quite informal dialogue, actually. there were some set piece meetings, of course there were, but I think there was a lot of reaching out, professionals reaching out to each other. And if there's one thing I hope we can keep, it's that. I think we broke down some barriers. We got some interpersonal engagement going that was new, and actually really enabling and empowering. And yeah, I think if we're going to keep something, let's keep that for definite.
Very good. So one from Robert Natman. He says, how do we manage an aging workforce who can be more seriously injured and more likely to slip, trip and fall due to the loss of mobility?
That's a big question. That's a whole other seminar, I think. Do you know what? I think the key is to engage with people, to not try and do it to them, because everybody's different. And there's no doubt that as you get older, things don't work quite as well as they used to. And sometimes gravity takes over a bit more often and it hurts more because you don't bounce quite so well. But everybody's different. And I think if we can open up a dialogue that allows people to talk about what they can do and what the challenges are, then we're much better able to address those and meet them. I think we fall down when we assume that because you're 70, you can't climb stairs, or because you're 65 and male, you're likely to have a heart attack at some point in the near future. You know, we can't generalize like that. I think moving all that great work we've done on conversation further into the health and well-being agenda, so that actually we're able to say, are you okay? And people are able to say, do you know what, I'm not okay. My knees don't work so well anymore, and I just can't do the trudging up and down the access point steps with the equipment. Because we want to retain people, right? We want to retain that knowledge and experience. So let's think about what we can do with people who perhaps can't do the frontline operational roles anymore because they're fantastic trainers and they're fantastic mentors and they've got all that great knowledge to share. So I think it's about thinking about the cans, not the can'ts.
I think certainly when you think of COVID, the railways in general have a reasonably aging population themselves, so were hit quite hard. You know, and perhaps that's another question in itself. How do we deal in the future with another pandemic with an aging population?
Yeah.
Just on the...
Go on, Keith.
No, sorry, thank you, Louise, sorry. Just on the question about accessing walkways and stuff, one of the questions that Nick Millington answered yesterday on the Safety Task Force session, which I'm sure will be available for anyone who wants to get it on the YouTube channel at some point, was a question on safe cess walkways, which is a big focus of Nick and the Safety Task Force. Now there's 3,500 or thereabouts have been completed, I think, but that is a start. You know, I've had one recently where someone had to walk 2.5 miles to get to the site of work, you know, along embankments and ballasting, etc. You know, half-hour accidents will be people falling on site, same as the UK in general, you know, and however many 8,000 broken bones last year. So things like that, a physical change that we can do, investment by Network Rail in that, which is primarily their infrastructure, is key to that success. So that, I think, organisations like the task force are doing some physical demonstrative works that will assist in that as well.
Yeah, and you know, the government's talking about investment, right? Talking about building back better and levelling up and all of this sort of thing. Last week there was the announcements about investment in rail in the northern part of the country. So, you know, shout out to the designers of these new schemes. Let's design in those safety features that are absent in the old Victorian parts of our railway where we just make do. Let's not go on just implementing the same standards that we've always had. Let's write new standards that design safety in and keep our railway accessible for a longer period of time.
Absolutely. There was a couple of comments in the chat. I don't know if you can see that, Louise, and it ties in with one of your points about what the next big issue may be on the risk registers or whatever. And William Peaks made the point, and a couple of people had, about sustainability. You know, and you made a very good point on that. And it is, you know, if sustainability and global warming or whatever environmental issue we face affects availability of workforce, availability of materials, of plant, then that surely is, I mean, it is a very hot, not a hot topic. It is a big topic that we have to take on.
And it's different, right? Because it's a slow burn. The pandemic was like, not here, bang, here. And you hit it running. But the climate emergency has been growing over a period of time, and we've got this dawning awareness of issues now. And the COP26 conference, lots of the media around that painted some really frightening pictures. But yeah, I think that's definitely up there, and I wouldn't say that's the next big thing waiting in the wings. I'd say that's here, right now. Yeah. And we need to be dealing with it. But it's different because it's incremental and it's onward developing. It's not the big bang in the same way.
Yeah, could argue we've had that argument in health for years and years, haven't we? Yeah. Things like asbestos that we've known about, yeah. And it's taken multiple deaths before people then react.
So are we brewing up an epidemic of people who've got musculoskeletal problems or cognitive and attention disorders because of this massive switch we've had to technology? There's all sorts of studies out there, but nobody really knows the answer.
Certainly, it wasn't that long ago we had a young child die in London from fumes, and that realization that it was the pollution in London that was killing people, and yet really we've not changed the way we do our motor vehicles yet.
Yeah. But I think you're right, Louise. You made a couple of very good points. And it is very easy to focus on the negative. I think William's put a comment in about, as you say, what we can do there and what we can't. I think it's very good that you've highlighted the positives there. I know this stuff about overnight becoming experts and giving that guidance to allow business to continue. And businesses have continued. A lot of them haven't, obviously. But I think that focus on the positive is something we need to continue. I don't want business to drift back into the way of, just having safety in the background somewhere to clear up when something goes wrong. We should be involved, and I've been able to demonstrate that through the pandemic.
But sometimes it's about thinking about the guidance as well, isn't it, to help point people in the right direction and ensure that we do have a trained and competent workforce to deal with that, rather than people having to think at the last minute.
Yeah. Getting it upstream, designing it in, applying that hierarchy of control, and us becoming facilitators, not doers. It's a trend that's been going that way anyway, but I think the pandemic threw a spotlight on it.
Do you have any figures then, Keith? I don't know if you've got anything on workforce numbers and workforce shortages. Certainly in overhead line, I remember a few years ago expecting to be 1,000 short in skilled workforce in terms of overhead line, and construction industry, I think, have similar figures. I don't know if that's any better in different organisations, or if your organisation's pretty large, Louise.
It is, but we suffer too. We've got a real shortage of drivers, would you believe? Yeah. We're desperately trying to recruit drivers, and it introduces all sorts of safety risks because you've got a population of people and you've got a chunk of work that needs to be done, and you've got to populate the work with the people that you've got. So you have people on overtime, and then you're working to manage fatigue and everything else. But bringing new people on isn't all about just doing the advertisement and the interview and a quick whiz through a training course and you're there. There's something like driving or overhead line technicians that takes time served skill building, knowledge and skill building. It's not something where you can go street to seat, they call it. You can't do that. You can perhaps take somebody from driving a passenger train to driving a freight train with a bit of sort of conversion training, but these are skills that need to be learned over a period of time. It's not quick stuff, and I think it's a massive worry for the industry, particularly because we're seeing that the industry is going to grow. And I think there's a lot of work going on in lots of places now. I don't have numbers. My head doesn't do numbers. I don't store them well. But lots of people in the industry are now talking about current skills gap and future skills gap and trying to think about how we encourage people. But we can all do that just by talking about what we do, because I know I'm a bit of a railway geek, But you start talking about the opportunities that we have in our career and the challenges we get and how exciting it can be, and people want to get involved.
Do you think we appeal to a diverse enough range within society for driving and railway in general?
No, I don't. And I think my conversation with our Kickstarter chap last week proved that. He had no knowledge. He'd not even considered the railway as a career opportunity. Just didn't think about it. And that's really sad, because there are so many great opportunities in the railway sector for good, enthusiastic people in lots of different lines of work. And I don't know how we get over that. We definitely need some awareness raising, because once we started talking to him, he got quite excited and he's really keen to stay. But he knew nothing about it. We're not reaching out to young people in schools enough. I know we're doing some great STEM work. And actually the rail sector is brilliant at STEM engagement, but we've got to go further and we've got to do more. And I know Siemens very actively supports the military to rail program. There's got to be more stuff like that we can do to specifically target people who are outside of the world of work but wanting to get in, and help them understand just what opportunities there are in this sector.
I think military to rail is a good example. We're taking people who are an older generation already to then convert. I'm thinking more of the younger people, as you say, more the STEM and the people at school at the moment, maybe even in primary school, to help shape their thoughts on a career, rather than waiting to the last minute or until they've already had a career and then trying to convert across.
I mean, depot open days were great for that.
Yeah.
I hope we can get back to things like that, and Rail Week and things like that once COVID disperses a little bit more, because they're amazing. I worked through a couple of depot open days when I was at Siemens, and the thing that people said to me most often during the day is you're out there and interacting with the public. They said, "Oh, it's so much cleaner than I thought." And I think there's this perception of the railway as big and dirty and unpleasant. But the modern railway is not like that. Well, maybe, trackside on a Friday night shift, maybe not quite so great. But, there are so many things in the rail industry that are not like that at all. There's lots of high-skilled design roles and engineering roles, lots of roles for people who are experts in data and analysis and planning. And I don't think people know. It's really sad, but I don't think people know. But I think there's a role for that. Those depot open days, more like that, more of the STEM engagement, more opportunities for people to come and look for themselves, because it's infectious, isn't it? Once you get into the rail sector, you get quite excited about it.
Yeah, you do tend to. That's a very good point. Yeah, in terms of open days, I mean, what Siemens have in terms of the new facility that's been built, and some of the existing ones, and even light rail depots, which I have been to, which are exceptionally good, and even events like Rail Live and things like that. I mean, that is exclusively a rail event, but I presume there's nothing to say it can't be open to universities and links. There's a few rail organisations I do know who've got some very good links to universities like Warwick and Coventry down there. That's
but as you say, let's get them earlier. What can IOSH do to help us get into primary schools and get people excited about rail and about safety way early on in their career? I mean, I chose a career in safety from school, but I'm still the exception to the rule. There's not many people who've come into safety the route that I have.
No. You think, I know Network Rail were behind the Thomas books, the Stay Safe with Thomas books, but really we've had no follow-up within primary schools to keep that engagement going.
I mean, years ago, kids would have said, my mum was a primary school teacher for years, and years ago, if you said to kids, what do you want to do when you grow up? They would have said, I want to be a policeman or a fireman or a train driver or a nurse or a teacher. Now you say to kids, what do you want to do when you grow up? They say, well, I want to be famous. And this rise of the celebrity culture, everybody thinks they've got to make their mark on the world in a particular way. But, those doctors and nurses and train drivers and policemen and mechanics, they're still really important, and society will collapse without them. So somehow we've got to make them sexy.
Yeah, it's a challenge for the rail industry, never mind IOSH, I think. Louise. Yeah, absolutely.
No,
So
I was just checking. I think we haven't had any more questions in.
no, we haven't. I think that's been very good today, Louise. Thank you again for the points. I think I'll just recap a couple of those points you made about the world of work changing. That in terms of everyone catching up to understand that we are not going back to where we were is a key point. I think that's a very good point. You know, and being entirely flexible. And again, the point about, you know, accepting, as we did in the pre-meeting for this call, that someone came to my door at, you know, 10 to 1. That's just what you do now. Nobody's getting embarrassed about that anymore. The world of work has changed, and the money is moving about to different areas. We talked about that earlier on. Yeah, and yeah, we just need to understand, and law, guidance, legislation will have to, I think, catch up slightly to where we are, because business will dictate that to some degree as well. You know, if businesses don't have the same property in the centre of London, for example, and various parts of the world and cities, then, you know, things will change. You know, as you mentioned, DSE, Louise, is a very good point as well. So yeah, a very good point. And the point about the next big challenge is a very good one, and one that I think we should all be looking at. That's excellent. Louise, thank you again on behalf of IOSH. Apologies for Ed, who's listening in, I believe, but can't join the panel at the moment. But thank you again on behalf of the Railway Group Committee and Ed and IOSH. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks for the invitation, and, you know, I hope it's added some value, and I hope that the rest of your day goes really well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take care and stay safe.
All right. Thank you,
Take care,
everyone.
everyone. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, everyone who's attended. Thank you.